In this video, we are going to use basic statistics to learn more about our gameplay in FTL faster than light. This includes keeping track of our stats, creating metrics, and getting better at the game through simple analysis. Before we dive in deeper, let me get you up to speed if you don't know what FTL is about. Recently, I've been playing a lot of roguelikes and roguelike-likes. In these games, you play through procedurally generated levels, which usually have a set structure to them until you defeat some kind of final boss. If you're not familiar with this genre at all, think of Super Mario World for the Super Nintendo, but each time you play, the blocks and enemies are in slightly different positions, meaning that there's a general structure and theme to each level, but it's not going to be the same every time you play. When I decided to make a video about Faster Than Light, I already played for hundreds of hours throughout the last decade, but I still feel like I make some of the most basic mistakes when playing. This happens to me more than I would like to admit actually, so whenever I lose a round in a roguelike game, I sit back and ask myself, why did I take so much damage all of the sudden? I thought I was doing so good and now it's just game over? What went wrong? Here are two examples for this. First, when I pick up a bad item in the Binding of Isaac and my damage output is suddenly halved, I know exactly that it was probably a mistake to pick that item up. Or secondly, when I spend all my money on a card in Slay the Spire and it turns out that it doesn't really fit into my deck at all, I know it was a mistake, even though I don't lose the round immediately. Depending on the depth of the game and my personal experience with it, finding out what went wrong might be easy or rather difficult. When you think about your gameplay retrospectively like this, you can map certain actions you took during gameplay to the outcome of the game, so you might be able to answer the question, did I just win because I emphasized picking up this item? Or did I just lose because I didn't? You can keep that information in mind for following playthroughs, avoid making the same mistakes over and over again, and become a better player over time.
Again.
In some games, this can become quite complicated. For example, in Hades. The game gives you progression options that depend on each other. These options are provided by the Greek gods in form of special powers, and some of these will only be offered to you if you already have a certain set of powers from them. Mapping out which options are good or bad becomes a lot more involved in this game. Remembering single mistakes turns into remembering a whole decision tree of options. Personally, I enjoy a game a lot more when the decisions I make involve a lot of the game's systems and also have a lot of impact on the future decisions I can make. A game that does this a lot is FTL Faster Than Light, and that's why we'll be taking a look at it today. In FTL, you control a small spaceship and the crew on it to deal with randomly chosen conflicts that throw themselves at you. You can choose to approach them peacefully, fight your way through, or experiment with other decisions in a text-based adventure game style. Your overall purpose is to collect enough in-game currency, in this game it is called scrap, in order to upgrade your ship enough to successfully fight a final boss at the end of the game. And with this said, let's dive into today's topic. Each playthrough offers a vast array of decisions to take, and most of these decisions have an actual impact if you are going to win in the end or not. But it's very hard to keep track of all of these different decisions. So sometimes after losing a run, I genuinely ask myself, what did I do wrong? So in this video, we'll be taking a short and exemplified look into how I would go about finding out what went wrong in a run, with the simple goal to improve at the game and become a better player. We will be answering the following questions. How does my average win look like? What went wrong in that last round? And of course, what are the best and worst ships in FTL? To answer these questions, I build a small database of runs where I keep track of all my stats in order to compare my performance against. Before we can start to compare anything, we have to collect the necessary data. In our case, FTL will provide all the data we need in the save files that are automatically created and updated after each jump between beacons. This means each time we visit another beacon on the star map, a checkpoint is created and saved on our hard drive. This save file is located in the Documents folder and once opened, looks like this. Yeah, not too useful yet. Thankfully, the right software to extract the information is already written and we can use it to extract the save data for each jump and collect it in an Excel file. Here you can see the file. It has 227 columns, or in other words, attributes that we are keeping track of. The amount of rows correspond to the amount of jumps and are different for each playthrough. We can fully rebuild our playthrough with the information we gathered here, but this on its own is not yet too useful to us, which is why we manipulate and aggregate the data in the following steps. Let me give you an example. Throughout our playthrough, we keep track of the amount of scrap we have in our inventory at each checkpoint. From these two attributes, the amount of scrap in our inventory and the certain checkpoint number or beacon number, we can create a new attribute that we can name scrap earned per checkpoint. We can calculate it like this. This new attribute can provide us with information on which decisions gave us a particularly good amount of scrap. Let's make a hypothesis at this point. I say the amount of scrap we earn per run impacts the outcome of the run. So if we earn more scrap, we are more likely to win, and otherwise, if we earn less scrap, we are more likely to lose. This will be useful to keep in mind for later. Okay, while this new attribute seems helpful to judge our performance in a run, if we aggregate it, we can extract even more information from it. So, if we take an average of this new attribute, we could compare a specific decision to the average income per jump in space. This is already more useful because we immediately have a value for comparison. Or here's another example. See, FTL splits its gameplay into 8 different sectors. So it would be helpful if we could know how much scrap we earn per sector. Here we take our new attribute, scrap earned, and sum it up for each of the visited sectors. Now we see the amount of scrap that we collected in the first and second sector and have a new attribute that we can compare our performance against in the future. While the presented method of manipulating and aggregating data is already good enough to provide us with a decent overview of our playthrough, we don't really know if earning a certain amount of scrap in the first or second sector is any good or bad. In order to answer this question, we need to play through the game many times, manipulate and aggregate the data over and over to have something to compare against. So if I would play around now, I can take a look at my performance in the first sectors and compare to the averages that I collected. Maybe I earned a lot more scrap in the first sectors than on my average run, but started earning less scrap by the fourth sector, and eventually lost at the final boss. Then I can take a look at the decisions I made in the fourth sector and analyze what I did wrong. But, of course, all of this only makes sense if our hypothesis from earlier that the amount of scrap we earn impacts the outcome of the run is correct. In order to illustrate this form of gameplay analysis, let's move on to another example. Now we will take a look at the scrap we are currently holding in our inventory. I have a question for you. Do you think it is better to have more scrap in your inventory or less scrap? Think about it for a moment. In my opinion, you always want to have as little scrap as possible. Why, you ask? Because that in turn means that we are spending our money on upgrading our ship, which in turn is helpful in order to defeat the final boss. This might not always be true. See, with this statement I uncovered an underlying assumption I made about the game. As a hypothesis, this is my assumption. Spending money to upgrade your ship, weapons or crew is useful in order to defeat the final boss. There's a problem with this assumption though. Upgrading your ship is quite complex. Some upgrades are not as impactful as others, and certain scenarios in the game call for certain upgrades to be made. While this is a complex matter, I think the hypothesis generally holds up. In my opinion, you want to spend your scrap like you're playing StarCraft. Floating scrap is just as bad as floating thousands of minerals or Vespene gas. Your scrap doesn't earn you any interest like in Teamfight Tactics, where you actually want to bank 50 gold to generate more income, and you cannot invest your scrap into stocks like in the real world. Basically, your only form of investing comes from investing into your ship and crew, and an indicator whether you did this well or not throughout the playthrough would be the average amount of scrap that was in your inventory. And in order to find out how much average scrap held is good or bad, we want to compare our runs again. I hope you got a feel for this kind of stuff now, because we will be taking a look into an example right now. In order to answer the most interesting questions I have, let's head over to the Excel report I created and start with this specific question. Why did I lose my most recent run? We can see the last run I played in the overview section of the report. I played Zoltan C and lost. To find out about the circumstances, let's take a look at the sector section of the report, where we can take a look at all the attributes and metrics. Here we can see everything that I'm tracking. Starting with an attribute, we can see the most recent performance under observation, and we can compare that observation to the average win, and the average loss. In the score observation, we can see that I lost the run in sector 5, since that is the last sector I gained any score in. When we compare the score gain in this run with the usual score gain per sector, we can see that I was underperforming in each sector, but especially did bad in sector 4. We can check for the same relation in the scrap earned section. Moving on to the scrap held section, we can see that I did spend my scrap quite well, but maybe I spent it a little bit too well and was not able to buy a weapon in a shop that would have been critical to my success. I can always take a look at the detailed Excel file for this specific run to explore such thoughts if I would like to. So, thinking about the hypothesis from earlier in the video, it might not be correct after all. This is definitely something to think about. Keep in mind that we do not want to reduce the average amount of scrap held to 0. We just wanted to keep it small. How small? We are yet to find that out. Maybe around 50 scrap in the early game and 70 scrap in the later sectors would be a good amount to aim for. Moving on to the number of beacons visited on the star map, we can see that I was quite in line for an average loss, always visiting less beacons than on an average win. I think that this has mainly to do with bad planning or a bad layout of the star map. Sometimes visiting fewer beacons than on average just cannot be avoided due to a bad map generation. Next up are the ships defeated. We can see that I did quite well in the early sectors, but then again majorly misplayed in the 4th sector. At this point, we could go on and look at the remaining attributes, but I already know that I just played very poorly by the 4th sector and want to check the detailed file to confirm what went wrong. After looking at the detailed file, I can tell you that it was a combination of bad events, not fighting enough ships, and sadly not being able to upgrade my weapons that ended the run a sector later. So from this specific run, I learned that I should emphasize upgrading my weapon system so I can fire at least 4 shots at once by the 4th sector. Other interesting questions we could look at are, for example, when should I upgrade my shields for the first time? Should I upgrade my sensors or piloting system ever? What are the best weapons to win with? Now for the most important part of the video, let's answer the question, what are the best and worst chips in FTL? But how can we go about answering this question? Should I just look at my win rate for all the ships and list them out? How would you approach this question? Feel free to pause the video and think about it for a second. In my opinion, the ships differ the most from each other when starting a playthrough. In the endgame, all ships pretty much feel the same after I was able to install my favorite weapon systems, etc. So as a basis for comparison, I will be using the average amount of hull damage taken in the first 2 sectors. The ship that takes the most damage in these 2 sectors will be declared the worst ship, and the other way around. The best ship will be the one that takes the least damage. So starting out in F tier, we actually have 2 ships that are equally bad, and they are the Federation C and the Kestrel C. These ships are probably placed so low because I don't know how to play either of them. And looking at how they are starting out, I can see what troubles me. These 2 ships are really not strong, probably not the worst, but if I were to gather more data, definitely not the strongest. So let's just skip over all the tiers in the middle. We are here to take a look at the best of the best. And I can already see that I'm in trouble. Some really good ships are already placed into tiers. Oh god, why are the slug cruisers ranking so good? And coming in at number 1 we have the Rock Cruiser C. I don't know about this one, but I certainly had to have had an amazing run with this ship. Just from my feel, I don't think the Rock C is the best ship in the game. I already expect a spicy discussion, but let me be clear here. I would need to gather a lot more data for this to be accurate. So feel free to tell me what you think are the best and worst ships, and also what metric would you use to measure how good a ship is. Would you combine certain metrics into one single indicator? Let me know. And this is pretty much it for today. I learned from my first upload that some people might have the interest to replicate things shown in the video, so if you want to keep track of your stats as well and find out how you can improve in FTL, head over to my GitHub page where you can take a look at all the data and the code used for this project. Anyways, I had a lot of fun making this video and I hope you enjoyed it as much as my first upload. Thanks for more than 1,000 views and 30 subscriptions. If you have any questions, feel free to ask in the comment section below or contact me via Discord or Twitter. Thanks for watching.